The rain started on a Thursday afternoon in late September of 1981, and it didn't stop for 11 days. Not the kind of rain that comes hard and fast and moves on, the kind that settles in like a tenant who won't leave. Steady, relentless, the kind that turns fields into swamps and gravel roads into rivers of mud. By day 3, every farmer in Marshall County was checking their hay storage. By day 5, they were starting to panic. By day 7, the first bales were ruined. Hay stored in pole barns with open sides was getting soaked by wind-driven rain. Hay stacked outside under tarps was getting wet from ground moisture wicking up. Hay in half-full barns was molding from humidity that had nowhere to go. But in a field 6 miles east of Weston, on a farm owned by a quiet man named Dale Hoffman, 250 round bales sat perfectly dry inside structures that looked like they'd been built by a child. Simple post and beam sheds, rough-cut lumber, metal roofing, no sides, no doors, nothing fancy, just a roof on posts wide enough to stack bales under. Dale had built them in July, right after making hay, had spent 2 weeks putting up 4 of these simple sheds while his neighbors drove past and laughed. "Dale's building chicken coops for his hay," they'd joked at the feed store. "Waste of lumber," they'd said at the co-op. "Guy's afraid of a little weather," they'd whispered at church. But now, 11 days into a rain that wouldn't quit, those jokes had stopped because Dale's hay was dry, perfectly, completely, sellable dry, and everyone else's was starting to rot. Before we go any further, I need you to think about something. How many times have you been laughed at for doing something different, for taking precautions that seemed unnecessary, for preparing for a problem that might never come? Because this story isn't just about hay sheds. It's about the difference between reacting to disasters and preventing them, about the value of looking foolish in July so you don't lose everything in September. Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about farmers who survive by thinking ahead instead of just working hard. Let me take you back to where this really starts. June 1981. Dale Hoffman was 43 years old, farming 320 acres of decent ground in north-central Kansas. He ran cattle mostly, kept about 60 head of commercial Angus cows, raised their calves, sold them as yearlings. Not a huge operation, but steady, sustainable. The key to making cattle work was hay. Good hay. Enough hay. Hay you could count on to feed through the winter without losing quality or scrambling to buy more at inflated prices when everyone else ran short. Dale had been farming for 17 years by 1981, and he'd learned some hard lessons about hay storage, about how weather didn't care about your plans, about how one wet fall could ruin 6 months of work, about how moldy hay wasn't just worthless, it was dangerous to the cattle that ate it. Most farmers in Marshall County stored hay the same way, pole barns with open sides for airflow, or outside under tarps if they ran out of barn space. It worked most years. When fall stayed dry and winter came on schedule, that hay stayed good enough to use. But every few years, something would go wrong. A wet September, an early snow, a late-season thunderstorm that dumped 3 inches in an afternoon, and suddenly thousands of dollars worth of hay would be compromised or ruined. Dale had lost hay to weather 3 times in 17 years, never enough to break him, but enough to hurt, enough to make him cautious, enough to make him think about prevention instead of just dealing with problems after they happened. His wife, Karen, knew that look he got when he was working through a problem. She saw it in early June of '81, saw him standing out in the hayfield after cutting, looking at the windrows drying in the sun, that distant expression on his face. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "Thinking I'm tired of gambling with hay." "What do you mean?" "Every year we make hay, and every year we hope the weather cooperates for storage. And most years it does. But I'm tired of hoping. I want to know my hay's protected." Karen looked at their existing pole barn. "We can't afford to build more barn space." "I know, but I'm thinking we don't need a barn. We just need a roof." The idea was simple. So simple it seemed almost stupid. Instead of building expensive pole barns with walls and doors and ventilation systems, Dale would build basic sheds, 4 posts, roof beams, metal roofing, wide enough to stack round bales 2 deep, long enough for 20 or 30 bales in a row. No walls meant perfect airflow, no doors meant easy access. No complexity meant low cost. Dale did the math on a yellow legal pad at the kitchen table. A proper pole barn big enough to store 250 round bales would cost somewhere around $15,000 if he hired it out, maybe $8,000 if he did most of the work himself, but bought quality materials. These simple sheds? He could build 4 of them for about $2,500 total. Rough-cut posts from a local sawmill. Dimensional lumber for beams. Cheap metal roofing, basic hardware. "It's not pretty," he told Karen, "but it doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to keep rain off hay." "What do you think people will say?" Dale smiled. "Probably that I'm being cheap again." "Probably. But our hay will be dry." Dale started building in mid-July, right after he'd baled his first cutting. He worked evenings and early mornings before the heat got unbearable. Set posts in concrete, bolted on beams, screwed down metal roofing. His neighbor, a farmer named Rick Patterson, who ran a bigger operation on 500 acres, drove past one afternoon and stopped to watch. "What are you building there, Dale?" "Hay sheds." Rick looked at the simple post and beam structure, at the rough lumber and basic construction, at the complete absence of walls or sides. "That's not a shed. That's just a roof on sticks." "That's all hay needs. Roof to keep rain off, open sides for airflow." Rick laughed. "You know what happens when wind drives rain sideways? That hay's gonna get soaked. Maybe the outside bales, but stack them right and 90% stays dry." "Dale, this is Kansas. We get 50-mile-an-hour winds. We get tornadic storms. You can't fight weather with some posts and a tin roof." "I'm not fighting weather. I'm just keeping rain from falling directly on my hay." Rick shook his head, still smiling. "Well, it's your money. But I think you're wasting lumber." After Rick left, Dale went back to work. He'd heard versions of that conversation in his head before Rick said it out loud. Knew people would think he was being foolish. Knew the sheds looked crude compared to proper barns. But he also knew the math. And the math said that even if these sheds only worked half as well as he hoped, they'd still be worth the investment. By early August, Dale had all 4 sheds built. They sat in a row along the eastern edge of his hayfield, simple and functional and completely unpretentious. Each one was 60 feet long and 20 feet wide, tall enough to stack bales 2 high if needed. He started filling them as soon as they were done. Round bales from his second cutting, loaded with the tractor and stacked tight. He could fit about 60 bales per shed, and by the time he finished making hay in mid-August, all 4 sheds were full. 240 bales, all under roof, all protected. Word got around the way it does in farming communities. At the feed store, the conversation went like this. "Seen Dale Hoffman's hay sheds?" "Yeah, looked like something a kid would build in shop class. No walls, no doors, just roofs on posts. What's the point? If it rains hard enough, that hay's still getting wet." "Dale says he's tired of gambling with weather. He's gambling worse now. Spent good money on lumber to build something that won't even work." The consensus was clear. Dale Hoffman had wasted time and money on a solution that wouldn't solve anything. Dale heard the talk, didn't respond to it, just kept working, kept preparing for winter, kept taking care of the details that most farmers overlooked until it was too late. "Let me stop here and ask you something. When was the last time you did something preventive that people thought was unnecessary? When was the last time you prepared for a problem before it happened and got laughed at for it? Drop a comment and tell me, because Dale Hoffman understood something that most people don't. Prevention always looks wasteful until disaster strikes. September came in dry and beautiful, perfect harvest weather. Farmers were cutting milo and soybeans, getting crops out of the field, making progress. The long-range forecast showed a weather pattern that would bring rain sometime in the last week of September, but nothing severe. Normal autumn precipitation. Nothing to worry about. Dale's hay sat in the sheds, dry and protected. Rick Patterson's hay sat in his pole barn with open sides, arranged for maximum airflow. Every other farmer in the county had hay stored according to conventional wisdom. Barns when possible, tarps when necessary. Everything was normal. And then, on Thursday the 24th of September, the rain started. Day one wasn't concerning. A steady rain, sure, but manageable. Farmers had seen worse. Day two made people check their hay. The rain hadn't let up. Wind was starting to gust, driving moisture sideways into open barn structures. Day three brought the first problems. Some of Rick Patterson's hay, stored on the windward side of his pole barn, was showing moisture. Not soaked, but damp enough to worry about. Day four, day five, day six. The rain kept coming. Not violent storms, just relentless precipitation that never quite stopped, never quite let the ground dry, never quite gave anyone a break. By day seven, farmers were out checking their hay with moisture meters. Some bales were reading 15% moisture, 18%, 20%, getting into the danger zone where mold could start. Rick Patterson called Dale on day 8. "Dale, you got a minute?" "Sure. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." "Okay. Your hay, in those sheds you built, how's it doing?" Dale walked out to the sheds, brought the phone with him, pulled a bale from the middle of one stack, stuck his moisture meter in it. 12%, he said, silence on the other end. "Rick, 12%? That's what the meter says. Mine's reading 18 to 22, and it's in a barn. Open-sided barn. Yeah. That's your problem. Wind's been driving rain right into those open sides. Hay on the outside bales is wicking moisture to the inside bales. Humidity's building up because there's no through ventilation." More silence. "Dale, I've got 600 bales in that barn. If they mold, I'm looking at $20,000 in losses." "How bad is the moisture?" "Bad enough that I'm worried. Bad enough that I called you." Dale thought for a minute. "You want to move some of it to my sheds? I've got room for another 60, maybe 80 bales if we stack tight." "You serious?" "Yeah. Bring your good loader over tomorrow morning. We'll reorganize my stacks and fit in what we can." "Dale, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet. Let's see if we can save your hay." They moved 80 of Rick's best bales the next morning, restacked Dale's hay to make room, then loaded Rick's bales into the protected space under the shed roofs. The farmers heard about it. By day 10 of the rain, 3 more neighbors had called Dale, asking if they could store some hay in his sheds. Dale helped where he could, moved things around, made room. And on day 11, the rain finally stopped. The damage assessment took a week. Rick Patterson lost about 40% of his hay. 140 bales molded badly enough that he couldn't feed them. Another 100 bales were marginal, would have to be tested and mixed carefully to avoid making cattle sick. Total loss, close to $18,000. Other farmers in the county had similar stories. Some lost more, some lost less. But almost everyone lost something. Wet hay, moldy hay, hay that tested unsafe for feed. The only farmer in Marshall County who didn't lose a single bale was Dale Hoffman. 240 bales, all testing at 12 to 13% moisture. Perfect, dry, ready to feed. The $60,000 worth of hay that Dale had expected to lose bits and pieces of. Intact, complete. No losses, and the $2,500 he'd spent building those simple sheds, the best investment he'd made in 17 years of farming. Now I want to hear from you. Would you have built those sheds in July, knowing your neighbors would laugh at you? Would you have spent the money and time on something that looked unnecessary? Leave a comment, because this is the decision that separates the farmers who survive disasters from the farmers who just survive until the next disaster. The conversation at the feed store changed after the rain. Nobody was laughing about Dale's sheds anymore. Instead, they were asking questions. How did you know to build those? How much did they cost? Could I build something like that before next year? Would you help me plan it out? Dale wasn't the kind of man who said, "I told you so." He just answered questions, gave dimensions, shared cost estimates, explained his thinking. It's not complicated, he'd tell people. You just have to think about what hay actually needs. It needs to stay dry. It needs air circulation, that's it. You don't need walls or doors or fancy ventilation. You just need a roof and open sides. But what about wind-driven rain? Stack your bales smart. Outside bales might get some moisture on the windward side. But if you stack tight, the inside bales stay perfect, and even the outside bales dry out fine once the weather clears if you've got good airflow. Rick Patterson became one of Dale's biggest advocates. I laughed at him, Rick would tell people, thought he was wasting money on stupid-looking sheds, and then I lost $18,000 in hay while his stayed perfect. By the following spring, 7 farmers in Marshall County had built hay sheds based on Dale's design. Simple post and beam structures, metal roofs, open sides, nothing fancy. By 1985, it was over 20 farmers. The design had spread to neighboring counties. Implement dealers were selling shed kits based on Dale's basic plan. And Dale never charged anybody for the design, never tried to patent it or profit from it. Just shared what he'd learned because that's what farmers did. They helped each other survive. Here's what I need you to understand about this story. Dale Hoffman didn't invent covered hay storage. Farmers had been building hay barns for 100 years. What Dale figured out was that you could strip away all the expensive parts, all the complicated parts, and get 95% of the benefit for 20% of the cost. That's the insight nobody talks about, that sometimes the simple solution is the right solution, that sometimes looking cheap is actually being smart. If you're getting value from this, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's being pressured to spend more money than necessary, someone who needs permission to choose the simple solution instead of the expensive one. The years after 1981 proved Dale's design worked in more than just wet weather. In 1983, a late spring storm dropped 18 inches of snow in one night. Farmers with hay stored outside under tarps had to spend days digging out bales and moving them before they got soaked from melting snow. Dale's hay sat under the shed roofs, completely protected. Snow blew in from the sides a bit, but it fell on concrete pads he'd poured under the stacks, and it melted away without ever touching the hay. In 1987, a tornado touched down 3 miles from Dale's farm. The winds damaged some buildings, tore off some roof metal, caused general havoc. Dale's hay sheds flexed and swayed but held. The simple post and beam construction was actually more resilient than heavier structures because it had less surface area for wind to catch. In 1991, a drought year when hay was scarce and expensive, Dale's 3-year stockpile of perfectly preserved hay was worth more than his annual crop income. He didn't have to sell any of it, but knowing he could if necessary gave him financial security that most farmers didn't have. The sheds just worked. Year after year, season after season. They weren't beautiful, they weren't impressive, but they were functional, and in farming, functional beats impressive every single time. By the mid-1990s, Dale had refined his design. He'd learned that pouring concrete pads under the stacks helped with ground moisture, that orienting the sheds east-west gave better protection from prevailing winds, that spacing posts at 10-foot intervals gave you more flexibility in stacking patterns. Young farmers would come to his place to see the sheds, to ask questions, to learn from what he'd figured out. The key is not overthinking it, Dale would tell them. Hay needs 3 things: dry storage, good airflow, and protection from direct weather. These sheds provide all three for less money than any other option. But they're not pretty, one young farmer said. Pretty doesn't feed cattle, Dale replied. Dry hay feeds cattle. In 2003, Dale was invited to speak at a sustainable agriculture conference in Lincoln, Nebraska. The organizers wanted him to talk about low-cost infrastructure solutions for small farms. Dale stood in front of 80 farmers and ranchers and told them about the sheds, about how they'd started as a response to gambling with weather, about how they'd saved his operation and helped his neighbors, about how something simple and cheap had outperformed expensive and complicated. The agriculture industry wants you to believe that success requires spending money, Dale said. New equipment, better facilities, modern technology, and sometimes that's true, but sometimes the best solution is the one that costs the least and works the most. He showed slides of his original sheds, 22 years old at that point, still standing, still protecting hay, still doing exactly what they were designed to do. I spent $2,500 in 1981 building 4 of these sheds, he said. In the 22 years since then, they've protected probably 7,000 bales of hay. They've prevented losses that would have totaled well over $200,000. They've given me peace of mind every single fall when the weather turns uncertain. He paused. That's about $11 per bale of protected hay, or if you want to think about it differently, the best 100-to-1 return on investment I've ever made in farming. The room was quiet, so when someone laughs at your simple solution, when someone tells you that you're being cheap or short-sighted or foolish, remember this: the only metric that matters in farming is survival. And survival isn't about looking successful, it's about still being here next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. These ugly sheds kept me farming, that's all that matters. The standing ovation lasted longer than Dale's entire speech had. Afterward, farmers crowded around him with questions, with notebooks, with tape measures and cameras. Everyone wanted to replicate what Dale had built, and Dale helped every single one of them, gave measurements, suggested suppliers, shared mistakes he'd made so they wouldn't repeat them. "Why are you giving this away?" someone asked. "You could be selling plans or kits or consulting services." Dale looked at him. "Because when I needed help figuring out how to farm, people helped me. That's how rural communities survive. We share what works." Dale Hoffman is 76 years old now. He sold his cattle operation 5 years ago and leased his land to a young farmer who was just starting out. The 4 original hay sheds are still standing, 44 years old, still protecting hay, still doing exactly what they were designed to do. The young farmer who's leasing Dale's ground uses those sheds every year, fills them with his own hay, benefits from infrastructure that Dale built back when people were laughing at him. "Best thing about this place," the young farmer told Dale recently, "is that I don't have to worry about hay storage. Those sheds just work." Dale smiled. "That was the idea. So let me leave you with this. Right now, you probably have a problem you're trying to solve. And you probably have people telling you that you need to spend a lot of money to solve it, that you need the expensive solution, the complicated solution, the impressive solution. But Dale Hoffman proved something different. He proved that sometimes the best solution is the simple one, the cheap one, the one that makes people laugh until it saves you from disaster. The neighbors laughed when he built sheds around his hay piles, but when 11 days of rain destroyed everyone else's hay, Dale's bales stayed perfectly dry, and those simple sheds, those roofs on sticks that everyone mocked, they outperformed every expensive barn in the county. All because Dale Hoffman understood that prevention beats reaction, that simple beats complicated, that functional beats impressive. If this story changed how you think about problem solving in farming, do 3 things. First, subscribe to this channel for more stories about farmers who survived by thinking different. Second, drop a comment telling me, what simple solution are you avoiding because you're afraid people will laugh? Third, share this with someone who's overthinking a problem. Someone who needs permission to choose the cheap, simple solution instead of the expensive, complicated one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.